і світити самому. Якщо ви не створите світло, якщо ви не будете світити, нічого ви ніколи не знайдете.
Oleksandr Usyk was born in Crimea in 1987. He entered a world marked by economic turmoil and political uncertainty. The Soviet Union was already teetering on the brink of collapse. And in 1991, the Ukrainian people held a referendum to decide if Ukraine should leave the Soviet Union. Over 90% of Ukrainians supported independence. The implications of the referendum were enormous and historic. Boris Yeltsin later explained to George Bush why the Ukrainian referendum had felt like the final nail in the coffin of the Soviet Union.
He said that if Ukraine is gone, Russia is not interested in this Soviet project because Russia would be outnumbered and outvoted by the Muslim republics.
Ukraine was culturally critical to the Soviet Union, or at least to the Soviet leaders in Moscow. It was viewed as more traditionally Russian than many of the other Soviet republics.
So with the second largest republic gone, Russia didn't think that it was in Russia's interest to continue with the Soviet Union.
The loss of Ukraine struck at the core of traditional Russian identity, and the situation was even more complex in Usyk's birthplace of Crimea. Although over 90% of Ukrainians supported leaving the Soviet Union, in Crimea, that number was only 54%. So a very significant portion of Crimeans did not support Ukrainian independence. They viewed themselves as essentially Russian. And as we know, this divide would later have major consequences for the region. Following the referendum on Ukrainian independence, the Soviet Union was dissolved hastily, which further exacerbated the hardships all over the region.
Meeting in a government house in the Beloversky woods outside Minsk, the three leaders will declare the Soviet Union dead.
If people could ever see how it happened, they would never forgive those people. You could forgive them for the sake of a big idea, but there weren't any ideas there.
Grandfather died 40 days ago yesterday. I must pay back the neighbors I borrowed money from. It's very difficult to bury people nowadays. A grave costs 6,000 rubles, a coffin is 6,000. I sell whatever I come across.
A series of civil wars broke out in former Soviet states.
The whole world knows I think about the bombing, the stealing, and the killing there. We haven't seen my child for 6 months. He went to stay with my mother, but we couldn't get him out. It was too difficult. It's very hard for an old person.
Although Ukrainians voted for independence, the collapse of the Soviet Union destroyed industry in Ukraine and had a devastating effect on the country's economy. They experienced one of the worst economic depressions in modern history. The GDP plummeted by over 60% in the early 90s. Hyperinflation, which soared to over 10,000% by 93, ravaged the economy, eroding savings and making basic necessities difficult to afford. People traded goods at local markets because money had become meaningless. Black markets and smuggling became widespread.
What do? They buy things from the government really cheap and then sell them on the market more expensive? It's not honest.
Double profit. Just from one trip you can make a year's salary. Otherwise you can't survive now.
The economic crisis had dire consequences for ordinary Ukrainians. The most simple and sobering sign of just how bad things got is perhaps the fact that male life expectancy declined by roughly 5 years in the early 90s, which is shocking for a country not in the middle of a serious war. Ukraine was a country struggling badly to find its footing as an independent former Soviet republic. And that struggle for stability resulted in hardship, food shortages, preventable illnesses, widespread poverty, and a sense of confusion and despair about their future.
Now I don't understand what's going on in this country. Do you know? We ourselves just don't know. No one knows what will happen next.
In Crimea, children played in streets lined with dilapidated Soviet-era buildings, while their parents tried to shield them from the full knowledge of these harsh realities. This was the world of Oleksandr Usyk's youth. Usyk's parents, originally from northern Ukraine, had moved to Crimea in search of better opportunities. His mother worked in construction, while his father, a military veteran, found employment as a security guard. Despite their efforts, the family's resources were limited. Usyk frequently changed schools as his family moved around, and as the perpetual new kid, he was the target of bullying.
Мені це дуже сильно давалось, тому що в мене фамілія Усік, в мене така щель, і мені треба було, з мене там сміялись.
Oleksandr had to work on a farm as a child and remembers being determined to escape that life.
Працювати не соромно. На той момент я допомагав своїм батькам, які працювали на 2, на 3 роботах, для того, щоб в мене був одяг, в мене була їжа. Загартували мене на сьогодні. Я інколи плакав від того, що мені було важко. То сльози були не слабкості, то сльози були бажання вирватися звідти. Коли я був малий, я жалівся, спілкуючись з Богом, я задавав питання: Боже, чому я тут? Що я такого зробив, що от такі... Я не буду розказувати про якісь складні часи свого життя, але я казав, чому отак, чому отак? Зараз я кажу йому дякую, що то був я тоді.
It was the family's financial hardship that ultimately led Usyk to boxing.
And you did used to be a footballer when you were younger. Was that something that you thought that you were going to pursue before boxing?
Football, I play, but same, I don't have money what pay for training. I changed sport because boxing will be free. My father told me, son, you can. I say, what I can? You can. Boxing is great sport. I say, yes, I know, but I like football. Maybe you try boxing. I say, okay, I try boxing.
Я не знав, куди я доберуся, але я знав, що мені треба працювати.
What's been the hardest fight of your career so far, Oleksandr?
Usyk's father played a crucial role in molding his son's character. As Usyk's amateur boxing career had begun to flourish, his father was a constant source of support and encouragement.
Це та людина, яка все життя мені говорила, що я можу.
Son, you can. All time support me. When I lost my father, okay, it's not bad. You do good work, next time you win. I say, no, it's bad sport, it's bad judges. Hey, Alex, no. If God give you opportunity, please, training, not stop. When you stop, you dead. Like samurai. You have road. Every time walk. Don't stop.
By 19, Usyk had secured a place on the Ukrainian national team, and his amateur career was highly decorated, culminating in a gold medal at the 2012 London Olympics.
Каждый день его благодарю в молитве за то, что он мне вот такой путь нарисовал, дал, послал.
Olympic Games, for me, it's highest, yeah.
But unfortunately, that was a time of mixed emotions, and his joy was tempered by personal loss.
What's been the hardest fight of your career so far, Oleksandr?
Втрата мого батька. Він побачив, що я став олімпійським чемпіоном, але я не встиг приїхати з золотою медаллю, щоб йому показати. Коли я приїхав, то він вже лежав у дерев'яній коробці. Я просто достав її сумку і приклав до його руки, отак його рукою мертвою потримав і вийшов з кімнати.
And I know you had a great phone call with him after the Olympics. How special was that for you?
My father told me, "Congratulations to son, I love you." My father never told me I love you. One, two, three. I every day told my son and my daughter I love you. Every day. I now not understand. A lot of people who now live Ukraine old, not say for wife, for children, for husband, I love you. Why? It's great words. I love you. No smile, no kiss. Oh, I love you. No. I don't know why. People like iron don't have feeling.
You know, it's interesting to hear Usyk discuss that. Sounds like he finds that generation difficult to understand. But his father grew up and lived through very tough times. Like we've just looked at the immense adversity his parents faced. Imagine trying to raise a young family in those conditions. The ideal of a strong, protective father figure emphasized toughness and sacrifice. Men were expected to be stoic. Emotions and affection were often seen as a sign of weakness.
My father, very serious was man. Not see emotion. I don't know.
It sounds like he struggles to make sense of it, almost like he felt those positive emotions and sentiments had been withheld, to the extent that when his father finally did express his love,
I love you.
It had a profound and lasting impact on Oleksandr.
This memory.
Special.
Yeah, for me, it's special.
And just as you see with Mike Tyson discussing Customado, it's always a subject Usyk struggles to broach without becoming deeply emotional.
Він коли приходить за день до поєдинку і посміхається.
I say, my father, hey, listen, you live that, I live here. Please. No coming for me. I love you.
Кажуть, що чоловіки не плачуть. Мужики плачуть сильними сльозами. Такими сильними сльозами.
I can never imagine Usyk getting hit with clean shots.
He'd give a lot of people problem.
This was just a hurricane that came into the boxing world.
Just months after Usyk's pro debut, Crimea became the center of an international crisis. In 2013, Ukraine's President Viktor Yanukovych decided to scrap a trade agreement with the EU in favor of a trade agreement with Russia. 300,000 Ukrainians protested on the streets of Kyiv in what has become known as the Revolution of Dignity. Approximately 100 protesters were killed. Amidst this backdrop of political turmoil in Kyiv, Russia decided to intervene militarily, leading to the annexation of Crimea. There were multiple motivating factors at play. Strategically, Crimea's location provided Russia with more control in the Black Sea. Putin claimed the need to protect the Russian-speaking population in Crimea. And of course, the annexation was seen as a way for Russia to delay Western integration, which was the issue coming to a head in Kyiv. But as I mentioned, dating back to the inception of Ukraine, Crimea was a region divided on the subject of Ukrainian independence. Many ethnic Russians in Crimea welcomed the annexation. They celebrated it.
Как называется эта страна?
Я уже говорила, губа треснет у них. У всех 28 стран и вот у страны Америки. И поперек горла станем. Мы не дадим. Мы все русичи. У нас одни корни, у нас одна история. У нас одни беды, одни победы. Мы все, у нас генетически мы русские все. Мы русичи. Мы святая православная Русь. Что еще им рассказать?
And so it was not a very violent takeover. 3 soldiers and 3 protesters was the extent of the death toll. many pro-Ukrainian Crimeans were simply intimidated into compliance. As a prominent Ukrainian athlete with Crimean roots, Usyk faced pressure to take sides in this conflict, and it was a difficult position to be in. He kinda couldn't win, in a way. You know, we see Usyk as plainly Ukrainian, but he was born in what was then part of the Soviet Union. Crimea then became part of an independent Ukraine, in which Usyk grew up, but it is now part of Russia. So for Crimeans, the lines on the map have been shifting and redefining their birthplace for decades. And so where does that leave them? It's complicated.
Even we were born in the Soviet Union, we were always brothers. There's so many Ukrainians living in Russia, so many Russians living in Ukraine. Actually, we're brothers. We need a peaceful solution.
Usyk was clear about remaining Ukrainian and continued to represent Ukraine in boxing. As you'd expect for many pro-Russian Crimeans, the image of Usyk flying the Ukrainian flag and celebrating Ukrainian culture was unfortunate and controversial, to the point that the Crimean State Council eventually stripped Usyk of honorary awards he had received, accusing him of Russophobia. So he paid a price for his perceived support of Ukraine, but at the same time, Usyk has also received criticism from many Ukrainians who question his commitment to Ukrainian independence. He's also been criticized for appearing to echo the sentiments of Vladimir Putin. In fact, both him and Lomachenko were placed on a Ukrainian database of Russia sympathizers who apparently posed a threat to Ukrainian security. So, as I said, a very tough political landscape to navigate. Despite his best efforts to avoid dividing people, much of Usyk's boxing career has been politicized and was tied to the instability of his homeland. Regardless of the backdrop, Usyk's ascent in the cruiserweight division was meteoric. In just his 10th professional fight, he captured the WBO cruiserweight title. This victory set the stage for his participation in the World Boxing Super Series. This was a cruiserweight tournament so epic that it would really cement his whole legacy at cruiserweight. So just to put this in context, at the outset of this 8-man tournament, Usyk was the WBO champion. But the incredible thing about it is that all 4 champions were in the tournament. Usyk had the WBO, Myris Briedis had the WBC, Uniel Dorticos had the WBA, and Murat Gassiev had the IBF. On top of that, all 4 champions were undefeated. 6 of the 8 competitors were top 10 fighters. So this really was the best fighting the best to see who's number 1. 4 perfect champions entered, but only 1 remained undefeated. Usyk emerged as the first undisputed cruiserweight world champion in the 4-belt era, and he did it the hard way. He faced each of his 3 opponents in their home countries, including 2 of those 3 undefeated champions. So just a legendary tournament that really defined his career at cruiserweight.
He's a southpaw, he's an Olympic gold medalist, he has incredible footwork.
He unified all the cruiserweight titles. He's only done one thing, win.
In his next fight, he ended his cruiserweight career with an 8-round stoppage of Tony Bellew.
I was absolutely exhausted after 7 rounds of being in the ring with him. And I was exhausted because he made me exhausted. He physically wasn't as imposing as I thought, but mentally exhausted me.
It's kind of like the mental decapitation that they let evolve over the distance of the fight.
I believe Oleksandr Usyk is the greatest cruiserweight that there's ever been, purely because he's done something that no other cruiserweight in history has done. He has completely wiped out a whole division. He's unbelievable. I can't credit him enough. He is an unbelievably gifted fighter.
And thus began his assault on the British. In 2019, Usyk vacated his cruiserweight titles to move up to heavyweight. After 2 victories in the division, he challenged Anthony Joshua for the WBA, IBF, WBO, and IBO heavyweight titles. In a masterful performance, Usyk outboxed Joshua over 12 rounds to win a unanimous decision and become a 2-weight world champion.
You must be incredibly proud of your fellow countrymen.
It's an excellent fight, very clever. Everybody happy, it's whole country excited.
But as Usyk continued to reach new heights, the situation in Ukraine deteriorated further. Putin has often described Russians and Ukrainians as one people. He has previously referred to the collapse of the Soviet Union as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century.
For some inexplicable reason, Lenin, the founder of the Soviet state, he transferred to that newly established Soviet Republic of Ukraine some of the lands together with people living there, even though those lands had never been called Ukraine. Those lands included the Black Sea region, and which had no historical connection with Ukraine whatsoever. And let's get into the fact that after 1991, when Russia expected that it would be welcomed into the brotherly family of civilized nations, nothing like this happened. You tricked us. The promise was that NATO would not expand eastward, but it happened 5 times. There were 5 waves of expansion.
Growing concerns about Ukraine's further alignment with the West and over NATO expansion eventually erupted in February 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine.
Putin takes us back almost to the Middle Ages, the idea of siege warfare, the idea that there is no civilian immunity.
The biggest in Europe since World War II, and it really shocked the people of Ukraine.
Very few people in Ukraine believed what Vladimir Putin was saying, that Russians and Ukrainians were one and the same people. But the majority believed that they are certainly close culturally and historically. And from that point of view, the bombardment of the Ukrainian cities became such a shock to the Ukrainians. Because deep down, they maybe looked at Syria, they looked at Chechnya, and were explaining that through the fact that there was basically such a big cultural gap and difference between Russians and those countries and those nations. My understanding, at least, most of them had difficulty imagining the war of that proportion and that sort of ferocity and that sort of war crimes.
Здесь погибла моя семья.
At the time of the invasion, Usyk was in London, discussing a potential rematch with Joshua. He immediately returned to Ukraine and joined a territorial defense battalion.
Я зразу почав думати, як мені повернутися, тому що в Україну літаки не літають. І одна машина їхала в Київ. Це наша машина. То я сутки добирався. Їздив підтримати хлопців. Знаєте, я насамперед, коли вийшов там з машини, ми там лазили йшли там по окопам, і я про що подумав? Я почав нюхати, що відбувається. Там смертю пахне. Важкістю якоюсь, такою негативом. Там не хочеться знаходитись. Деякі, ми досі не знаємо, де вони.
Within the last 4 days, they launched over 100 missiles to Ukraine.
What did the military say about Oleksandr fighting Joshua in the rematch?
They supported me and they almost convinced me to leave Ukraine and to take the rematch.
And I'm sincerely grateful to the legendary hero of Ukrainian and world sports, our champion, Oleksandr Usyk, and the Usyk Foundation for the willingness to work together, for supporting our humanitarian efforts. Together, we will definitely win. Thank you, champion.
І з Віталієм Володимировичем, з обома, і коли ми тільки на початку вступили там в тероборону, я спілкувався з Віталієм Володимировичем. Каже, молодець, що ти там все таке, але ти більше зробиш, якщо будеш говорити про це.
So it was with all these immense distractions and the now enormous pressure of representing Ukraine that Usyk successfully defended his titles in a rematch against Joshua.
Oleksandr Usyk has retained his heavyweight title belts
Багато хлопців з фронту, вони хочуть мотивації, вони хочуть цю перемогу. І це як їхня перемога. Це перемога всієї країни моєї.
It shows you what an incredible fighter he is.
I think he has more power at heavyweight.
Usyk belongs where he is. He's a serious fighter.
And so, for many Ukrainians, Usyk came to symbolize the fighting spirit of their country. It was in this context, seemingly with the weight of the world on his shoulders, that he took on his biggest challenge.
The fight that we all want to see is Tyson Fury versus Oleksandr Usyk.
Do you think we could see a unification fight between these two?
This is what we want. We want the best to meet the best.
Where's Oleksandr Usyk, the rabbit? Hey, rabbit! You are next! Me and you!
It is signed.
Signed. It's for the 4th belt. Fury will fight Usyk for the undisputed heavyweight championship.
You know what's coming. You're getting smashed to pieces, sausage.
Usyk would attempt to unify the belts in a second division, and do so against a man widely regarded as the best heavyweight of his generation. A man who appeared to have every advantage: height, weight, reach. Fury had taken more damage, but he was the younger man, and he could potentially match Usyk in terms of being a cerebral, high-level boxing riddle. Exceptional footwork and movement for a man his size, an ability to switch between orthodox and southpaw. Good jab, unpredictable combinations. Just like Usyk, Fury was undefeated. But despite these challenges, over 24 rounds Usyk proved to be the superior boxer. In their first encounter, he secured a split decision, outboxing and outmaneuvering the larger man.
This historical win is not just important for Oleksandr Usyk. Can you imagine how much pressure this man had?
You went back to Ukraine after you won the undisputed world title. What did you see when you went back?
My people, my country, smile people. Yes, hard, but my people say, hey, you win, it's good. Not you, we. It's not only my win, it's all my country win. Because now...
Have you cried about the war?
Of course, but not see what I cry, but I do. 10 years, 6, 15, but it's only start, yeah? Life, it's only start. But for these people, it's last.
The rematch saw Usyk elevate his performance even further, securing a unanimous decision win over Fury, who at times looked just completely out of ideas.
I very respect this guy. I think it's very tough my opponent. Tyson Fury make me strong. Tyson is a great opponent. It's a big man, it's a tough boxer. It's a good man. A lot of talk to, yeah? It just show. I am very respect Tyson Fury.
I think he got a little Christmas gift from them judges.
Tyson Fury called this a Christmas gift for you from the judges, and Frank Warren says that he can't imagine how the judges scored so many rounds for you. How do you respond to that?
Uncle Frank, I think blind.
In the end, Usyk's wins over Fury were not just personal triumphs, but iconic victories for Ukraine. He had carried the hopes of a nation through 24 grueling rounds against one of boxing's great heavyweights. Oleksandr Usyk's career absolutely stands on its own merits, but his entire journey really cannot be fully understood in a vacuum. From the moment he was born, the tides of history and the shifting lines on the map have shaped his life. First as a child in a crumbling Soviet empire, then as a young man in a homeland struggling to find its identity, and now as a champion in a nation fighting for its very existence.